Greetings. Welcome to another monthly live chat. We're going live on Facebook, Facebook profile page, YouTube, and Instagram. Just going to let people sign on. If you are online, whichever platform you're on, let me know where you're joining from so I can give you a little shout out. Jeff Aficionado. Not sure from where. It's been a while. Badilio in the house from New Jersey, one of my favorite dancers. Also a really great instructor. Has a social, Picante, in New Jersey for those people who enjoy going out dancing in New Jersey and don't know where to go. That's one of those socials that you want to attend. Patrick from North Carolina. Nice to see you. Giannina from Holland. Awesome. Laxio from Spain. Charming Melody from Siberia. Ooh, Siberia. I still remember one of my trips when I went to the festival out there, and it was in January. I think it was the first weekend of January, and I was incredibly underdressed. I brought my warmest jacket, warmest clothes, shoes, and everything. And as soon as I arrived, the organizers had looked at me and they're like, "Yeah, we need to get you something else to wear." Jenny, oh, long time, Jenny from New York, Brooklyn in the house. Stephen from Toastmasters District 83, welcome. Hope you enjoyed the workshop that I gave, what was it, last weekend, 2 weekends ago, on mentoring. Wade from the other side of the Hudson River. Christian, no idea where you're at, if you're on the West Coast or on the East Coast. Mr. Who lives like this, Atlanta, Georgia. Shiva Loco. Again, if you are just joining, let me know where you're from so I can give you a shout out, and then we will get started with today's live chat. It was a hot winter in Siberia. Interesting. I think that's the time I should have visited Siberia. Javi in the house. Neha. All right. For those of you who don't know what I'm doing here, my name is Magna Gopal. For those of you who know me through dance, obviously I've got 20 plus year career there, but I'm also a public speaker, motivational coach, and this is my monthly live chat that I've been doing now. This is episode 26. So we've gone on 2 years, more than 2 years of monthly live chats. These live chats originally started with the purpose of answering questions to dancers specifically, but they have evolved into discussing all types of issues pertaining to communications, improving our relationships, improving the way we teach and the way we learn. And all of these lessons, whether they're extracted from dance or not, can truly apply to literally everything that we pursue and everything that we approach in terms of our changing our perspective so that we can maximize what we get out of life, right? And today's monthly live chat is going to be on defining terms, which we'll get to in a moment. But if you haven't yet, and this is your first time joining, you can always go and check out the previous live chats. They are all available on my YouTube channel. If you're already on YouTube, obviously you know what the channel is. But if you're not on YouTube, then go to youtube.com/MagnaGopal and you will find it all there. More hellos. Marcus from Seattle. Jeff from Curacao. Wow, 12 years ago. Another beautiful place. Beautiful island of Curacao. I went there 5 times actually for their, what was it called? Curacao Salsa Tour. And it was like a 1-week long event with dance parties in different locations, historic locations, on the beach, in a cave. some mansion and all this kind of stuff. It was a really fantastic event. I have not been there in a long time. I definitely need to go back. Leia in the house. Leia, I can't remember where you're from. Chomio, one of the best huggers that I know. All right, so again, these monthly live chats are broadcasted across my Facebook profile, Facebook page, YouTube channel, and Instagram. So if you see me looking side to side, it's not because there's anybody else here. It's just me, but it's multiple devices. So that's one of the reasons why this is happening. Okay. Leah from the UK. That's right. And if you're joining, don't forget to tell me where you're from so I can give you a shout out and also perhaps remember something about the place that you're from. Seeing as all the places I've traveled, I've slowly forgotten what is all happening in my memory of those places. So a couple of things I do want to address. I will be starting an audio podcast, Empowered with Magna. This is going to take some of the sections from these live chats, the questions that I've been asked. Also looking forward to doing some interviews on there. It's a little bit harder to coordinate interviews for this particular live chat, especially broadcasting on multiple platforms. That makes it even more difficult. So I'm looking forward to doing some of those, especially with lots of instructors, artists, and other people in other industries that I'm involved in who could share some insights into how we can improve our communication and our relationships. That live chat will be available on Spotify. It is in the progress of getting set up completely, but a lot of you would ask like, oh, do you have this as an audio only? Because on YouTube, I guess if you don't have YouTube Premium and you turn off your phone, that's it. The audio cuts out too. So it will be available on Spotify and other streaming platforms eventually, so keep an eye out for that. They will be bite-sized chunks of answers to the types of questions that I've received, and they will be dance-related, but also obviously everything. Because for me, dance is a microcosm for all the relationships and the ways we communicate in life. And if we can look at dance not just as this isolated, compartmentalized experience that we're having and start to look at the way we can use dance and the way we connect with other people and the way we communicate, especially non-verbally with other people, if we start to use those lessons that we've already gained experience into other aspects of our life, it makes it so much easier to connect and build relationships and communicate effectively. So look out for that. And if you need any more information, you can always check out my website, magnagopal.com, and send me a message if you need anything in more detail. Unit Collective. I am... Okay, cool. Already have... This is why you need some kind of like manager of comments sometimes, because there's always somebody who needs to be moderated and kicked out. Chomio, big hug back to you, my friend. Okay, so going into today's live chat, there are two questions that are not specific to our live chat that I'm going to answer later. One of them is based on a post that I had recently shared about letting rejection define your experiences. And the person had replied with a comment talking about basically always say yes. And some of you might know how I feel about that. Some of you might not. I will tell you at the end of this particular live chat's topic. And then the other question I got was about dancing with leads who are off time and how to manage that. So stick around for that. Those answers will be answered for you later. Moving on to our topic today, which is about how do we define terms to improve our communication and the results. I had posted a question on Facebook, which I'll get to some of the answers there. But for all of you, I'm curious. As students, think about your experience as students. It could be in dance. It could be in literally any other field of study, okay? But do you ever wonder why you're not progressing or why you don't feel confident about your progress? If you have answers to those questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I will definitely share them with everybody else who's here so that you guys can kind of interact across Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Same question goes for teachers. Do you ever wonder why you don't see progress. I mean, I've heard this a million times from teachers like, man, my students, they just like they're not learning, they're just not growing. They're just stuck, right? Or why they feel like their students are plateauing, even though the teacher is constantly adding new material and new challenges, right? Let's go to communication. Have you ever felt resentful about something somebody said to you? Or in that conversation, have you ever gotten defensive in the moment? And in your friendships, romantic and family relationships, do you ever wonder why there are misunderstandings and conflict? And if you're at work, right, if you've got a job, a company where you're working with other people, do you ever wonder why goals aren't being met to certain standards? And then on a personal level, do you ever feel unaccomplished, confused, or stuck? So I'm curious, what do you guys and gals, folks out there feel about those questions? How have how has what has been your experience as a student, as a teacher, in friendships, in communication with colleagues, or on a personal growth level? So Marcus said, yes, that happens when I get too proud to ask for help. And I've definitely felt stuck. Yeah. We like Kit Kat likes to dance said, because we often take classes we like rather than the classes we need. Sure. Are you speaking as a teacher or a student or both? And Marcus said, sometimes because I have people telling me that I'm too old. Wade, sometimes I felt into the trap to compare my progress with others, imposter syndrome. Yeah, there are a lot of things that we feel, right? A lot of reasons that we feel stuck, a lot of reasons why we feel there are misunderstandings with other people, a lot of reasons why as teachers we feel like our students aren't progressing, a lot of reasons as students that we feel like we're not progressing. And in my personal experience, I've found that it's this lack of clarity that's the reason for all of these problems. And most of that clarity lies in the definition of the terms that I've used with myself and with others, and the differences in those definitions. Because we can have a lot of meetings, conversations, interactions where there's a lot being said, right? A lot of people are speaking and listening, but there still isn't clarity. There isn't effective communication, right? So I posed a question on Facebook last week. And the question was, how do you prevent misunderstandings and miscommunication? There was a lot of really great responses to this. And one of them that I really liked was Ro Dancia. He shared a quote by George Bernard Shaw. It says, the biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has taken place, right? And that's one of our challenges. Like, I feel like we do not hesitate to speak, and we do not hesitate necessarily to get into conversations, including difficult conversations. But there is a difference between speaking and listening and communicating. And we assume oftentimes that because we're communicating, because we're speaking and listening, and we're in front of a person or on the phone or whatever the medium is of interaction, that there's something taking place that's productive, right? One of the other comments that I got, and I'll address this a little bit later, was uh, this person said, it's not you, it's them, right? Some people will take things the wrong and complete opposite way, no matter how well it's masterfully spelled out for them. And we'll get to that part. So in this particular situation, you know, I'm going to tell you a couple of stories of my own and why I picked this topic for this month's live chat based on some personal experiences. But let's let me get your definitions on certain 2 words. How do you define feminine dancing? And how would you define a good friendship? Simple, I guess, unless we've never really taken the time to explain it to ourselves or think about the actual definition. So I'll give you a second and take a sip of water, because every time I get on these live chats, I talk nonstop and never take a sip. And I wonder why my voice feels so hoarse by the end of it. While I wait for your answers, I am going to give a couple more shout outs here. And again, if you are just joining, let me know where you're from. Spinoza said, don't speak English very well, but I listen to you to learn. This is a perfect place, perfect comment for today's topic, actually. Sir Tech said, as a student, more focused what I learned in class and how I would look doing it around other people. The embarrassed factor, eventually focusing more on immersing myself and then embracing the music. Spinoza from Peru, but eventually it falls into place when it comes to expressions. Debraj from Calcutta. Okay. Wade said, Marcus, or a couple of things here in the comments. Most times I feel sometimes that people aren't listening. People hear, but they aren't listening. And then in terms of defining, a good friendship is one where you can say anything. Okay, interesting. So let me share a couple of personal stories. Let's go back to that word feminine, right? The definition of that. I have often been criticized for not being feminine enough in my dancing, right? And that depends on, how do we define feminine? Is it specific movements that define what makes something feminine? Or is it a woman, a female, expressing herself? For me, I obviously took the latter approach. I've also gotten a comment, I remember, on one thread that was like, oh, Magna is not a good follow. But there are plenty of other people who've said, I'm a great follow. And that is also about a definition. What is a good follow? What is a good, quote unquote, follow? Is it someone who strictly speaks when spoken to, right? As a follower, only does what the lead is asking you to do and nothing else? Or is a good follow someone who engages and collaborates and creates and connects? Another situation where I've taken the latter definition. I got a comment recently on a YouTube video where I was talking about the importance of fundamentals and how teachers need to emphasize the importance of those fundamentals so that students don't gloss over them, so that students don't think, okay, well, I know my 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7. Now it's time for me to be an advanced dancer and perform and teach and all of that stuff. It's important for the teachers to emphasize that fundamentals are deeper than just your basic step, right? The question that I had gotten was, if I was to revisit them, how does one go about doing that? When I practice my dance at home, do I just give thought to the fundamentals and analyze if I'm executing them really well? And that, again, depends on what is the definition of fundamentals, right? Because they can go into varying degrees of depth. Some instructors consider the fundamentals your basic step, your basic timing. Are you stepping on 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7 in dance? And are you with the music? Are you on time with the music? And if you are, then let's move on. Let's add more to that. For me, fundamentals are much deeper than that. Fundamentals are not just about whether you're stepping, but how are you stepping? For me, it's not just about creating a movement, but the quality of the movement. And so when I define and break down and teach fundamentals, I'm not just going to say, okay, step with your right foot here, left foot there, right foot here, and make sure it's on this count and this time to the music. I'm going to talk about, how do you connect with the floor? What is the quality of your step to the floor? So for me, an understanding of fundamentals is a deep understanding and awareness of your own body and how you move and how you create and how engaged you are. So if you, that's the question that I had gotten about, do I just go home, dance at home, and give thought to the fundamentals and analyze myself if I'm executing them correctly? Well, first step is, what did you learn as the fundamentals? Because if you just go back and review whether you're stepping on the right time, well, I'm sure that's an easy review. I'm sure that's going to be really easy to say, yeah, okay, I reviewed it, I got it. But if you've understood fundamentals in a different way, you will be reviewing what you had learned as just basic steps and basic timing in a different way. Like, what is the quality of my step? And in that sense, understanding those definitions also kind of determines, or is also determined by the definitions that you use for your own personal growth. What is your goal, right? What are you defining as your own purpose? Because not everybody, let's sticking to dance for now, not everybody is interested in being a very superbly skilled technical dancer who can do all sort of creative things and be musical and experimentative on the dance floor. Many people just want enough that they can get out there, ask someone to dance, connect with that person for 5 minutes of a song, and then bounce. And that's enough. So if your foundation, your fundamentals are good enough to achieve that, then you pursuing more than that is a lack of defining your goals clearly. And now you're going to feel frustrated or wondering why you're wasting time because, well, your goal was just to get on the dance floor and just do the basic and connect with a person and not really care about all those things. But because somebody said you should pursue fundamentals in more depth, now you're doing that. But for what purpose? To what end? Right? So in dancing and teaching, there are a lot of terms that are vague, that are used frequently, but without any real purpose. This person asked me this question about fundamentals, but something like grounded, right? How many times have you heard the term as a student, or if your teachers here use the term, be grounded in your step? What does that mean? Or do it properly. What is proper? Right? Like I know the question I posed, and it's hard for me to pose these questions so that they encompass everything that I'm going to be discussing in these live chats. But the question I posed ended up, misunderstandings and miscommunication, ended up referring a lot more to just communication, verbal communication between people. But in reality, the definitions that we use and how clearly we explain ourselves, or how clear the explanation is that we are receiving, determines a lot more than just communication. It determines our happiness. It determines the fulfillment that we feel from pursuing something, and it determines our results as well. So another term that I could think of is soft lead and follow. How many times have you heard that? Right? Be a soft lead and follow. I've heard it many times. I have danced with people where we did not have a good connection. And I remember talking to them later and they said, "Oh, well, I was taught to be soft." But soft wasn't defined. And so what did I get as a connection from my partner? Non-existent. They were so soft that I could barely feel the connection. Soft actually, by my definition, is firm and assertive and intentional, right? So there are lots of terms. I would actually love for all of you who are in chat, I'm going to get to some of the comments that are here, but I'd love for you in chat to maybe share some other terms that, especially as students, but perhaps even as teachers, that maybe you've caught yourself saying, using, listening to without actually understanding the definition. And it's not to say that you don't have an understanding of that word, but the misunderstandings and the miscommunication and how that affects our connection and our personal results depends on a mutually shared understanding and definition of a word. So I'm curious, Just let me know if there are any other words that you have come across in your teaching, learning experience. It could be in dance, it could be in any area that you've heard often but haven't completely understood, or have understood in a certain way and then actually not had a connection with your instructor or with your student as a result of the difference in definitions. Okay, some comments here. Marcus said, when I was coaching, I always emphasize fundamentals. Again, this would be another situation, right? What are the fundamentals to you? And when you speak of fundamentals, do you define them in detail? Sorry, Instagram is the hardest part for me to scroll through, just because it's like I touch something and all of a sudden I'm on somebody else's profile when I'm just trying to scroll through the comments. Going back to friendship, a friend is someone I can come to with anything and not be judged. Beautiful. As a part-time teacher, you come across two types of dancers: the ones that learn fundamentals but want to go into the fancy turns, and the ones that hone their fundamentals to take their dancing to another level. Yep. Henry, content is king, 100%. Not sure what that was in reference to, but I'll take it as an overall blanket, 100%. Jeff said, you answered the question for me 12 years ago. What do you feel when you connect with your partner on the floor? Great. I'm glad that 12 years ago, even though I'm still working on these things, that I was already putting them into place then. Richie from Amsterdam. Henry said, properly varies from school to school, even some fundamental moves. Absolutely. A weak lead, forceful lead. Yep. Really, those are really common terms too. Okay, some comments here on Facebook and YouTube. Back to the feminine quote dancer. Wade said, think the nature of a feminine dancer is when she displays any lady expression of cuteness or uses her daily routine expression that communicates enjoyment, discomfort, and showcases them while dancing. And then good friendships are entities that appear in your life and assist you progression throughout your growing in a positive manner. And then Marcus said, I was on a webinar for a law school open house. She said, I would like to learn to think like a lawyer. And I kept asking myself what that meant. Exactly, right? So there are the many reasons. So these are perfect examples, right? There are so many things that we hear that we might question, but we let them slide by. And that's okay that we let them slide by, because in some situations, as Marcus, you said, you're on a webinar and somebody asked something, or somebody said, I want to think like a lawyer. You didn't understand. There's no real reason to connect with that person. You might not know them, and there's no necessity there to build anything more, right? So you can let it slide. But we let a lot of these things slide, even in personal relationships. So let me speak to a couple of personal relationships, experiences that I've had that have resulted in a negative outcome as a result of not defining terms. So recently I had a situation with a friend of mine, a very close friend of mine, and the word support was poorly, or I would say not even defined in our conversations. With this friend, he had asked for support. He was going through a lot, or is going through a lot of difficult things in his life, and was talking about not feeling supported. And it was my assumption that my level of support would suffice. And I approached him with whatever I could give. I was there when he needed to talk. I wasn't always there, because we all have lives, we all have busy lives, but I tried to be there as often as I could. And what I ultimately realized, when I will tell you frankly, we're not in communication right now, because he needs some time to think about how he feels about the friendship, because I wasn't as supportive as he needed me to be. And I didn't understand what support meant to him. So naturally, I couldn't necessarily fulfill that, right? In past romantic relationships, some problematic words that weren't problematic because we spoke about them, but problematic because they weren't spoken about, because they weren't defined, were things like presence, right? Being present, or commitment, even. I didn't explain what commitment meant to me, to the other person, even though we said we're in a committed relationship, and that person had a different understanding than me. And as a result, well, things didn't work out. We had a lot of conflict. We had a lot of arguments, a lot of misunderstandings, because we never had a shared definition of commitment. With friendships, I've lost friendships over the word consistency. And not consistency that we are discussing the term consistency, but a lot of you talked about friendships here, defining friendship. Um, Jeff said, someone you can share good and bad news with, people that we can open up and talk to about anything. These are all beautiful qualities to have in a friendship. But what other things do you require in a friendship? Like, have you taken the time to define those things for yourself and then communicate those to the friend that you think is really close to you? Because what I've experienced in my relationships and my friendships and in my past is different people have different needs, and those needs change with time. And what starts out as a friendship that's initially, at the very least, where you're communicating all the time because it's a new friend, it's like a new toy, shiny, and you're all about that toy, you're all about that person, eventually things come up and other things start to interest you, and you don't have the same amount of time for that friendship as you did when it was your only focus. And as a result, what is that other person expecting? Were they expecting friendship to continue on this timeline and this consistency of communication? If they were, then you're no longer meeting their requirements of friendship. I've been pretty fortunate with some of my friends who, yes, when we first met, there was this excitement about, like, who are you? What do you do? What are your interests? Oh my God, we have that in common. And we talked and we talked and we talked a lot, like almost every day chatting. Those same friends, fortunately, we barely talk now. Like, we might text once every few weeks. We might actually hop on an actual call and a conversation every couple of months. Some friends, best friends, I don't even speak to for a few months, but it's because we've understood the friendship does not require that consistency in communication. But I have had other friendships where I haven't been consistent and they haven't been consistent. And they felt like, oh, you know what? You're not spending enough time with me. And I was like, well, what's enough time? I saw you 2 weeks ago, right? I mean, do you want me to spend every day with you? Do you want to talk every day? Because if that's the case, I can't. I not only I can't, I don't want to do that. And then now you start to question, well, can this friendship still exist based on these terms, these different definitions of friendship? Eduardo said, misunderstandings are solved with a smile. Ooh, if only it was that easy. uh, Again, going into the next part about definitions and how they impact us. The other area that they impact us, and this is not even communication based, like, it's not about actually whether you're defining your terms and being clear in your communication with somebody else, but productivity and self improvement. I'll give you guys the example of logo design, right? It took me a long time to redesign my logo. The first time I wanted to redesign it, the designer asked me, well, what are you looking for? And I said, oh, I want something that's bold and powerful, that's got my initials. And the designer came back with tons of options. Okay. None of them were what I liked. Nothing. And for me, I was getting frustrated because I'm paying and I'm wasting all this time going back and forth and not getting the results that I wanted. And this designer, with the multiple designers that I'd gone through, were frustrated because, well, you said certain things. I created something based on my understanding of those words. They didn't actually clarify it further either. I'm coming up with something based on my understanding of those words, and you're not satisfied with the result. You're not satisfied with my product. And so they're getting frustrated as well. And it wasn't until I defined it, right? My definition of it had to be more than vague words, bold and powerful. What does that even mean? So I found a bunch of examples. I said, okay, I like this because of this reason. I don't like this for this reason. I like this about this, but not that about that. I would like to combine this with this with the, I went into all sorts of detail to define exactly what I wanted. When I was able to do that, it took 2 iterations to get to the logo that I finally have, which you guys can see on wherever platform you're on. That's my MG logo. And it took me a long time to get there, but it was a lack of clarity in defining exactly what I wanted that led to that inefficiency, in productivity and wasted time communicating back and forth for no end. Same thing goes for my personal brand, personal services. There was a period of time where I was pursuing something, I didn't even know what I really wanted to do. I felt really stuck, and I wasn't sure, like, what am I just doing the dance stuff? Should I just be teaching the moves? Do I do the coaching and the empowerment speaking? Do I just focus on the fitness thing? Because that kind of came up during COVID. Like, I wasn't sure what my purpose was. And then there was this pursuit of, like, do I just go for likes? Do I just post things for the sake of getting likes and followers and fans and whatnot? And that lack of clarity in what my own purpose was led to all of that confusion and years of feeling quite stuck, actually, and not making progress. It wasn't until I defined that my purpose to myself and said, what do I really want to do? I want to empower other people. I want to share the lessons that I've learned from dance. I want to highlight certain things in whatever I'm doing in life to show a different perspective. And I want to create inspiration for other people to show them there are other ways to do things besides the things that they already know. Even my personal growth would have been stunted if I followed the definitions of other people. I had to redefine terms for myself. Being feminine, for example, if I had followed the definition that the majority of people had presented to me about being a feminine dancer, I would not be who I am today in this industry. I would not have gotten to my level of creativity and musicality and playfulness and connection with another partner if I did not pursue my own definition of it, if I just followed the definitions that were presented to me by everybody else. Even that's not salsa dancing, right? A lot of people I still hear it. But what is salsa dancing? Is it that strict basic step to the music, or is it connecting with another partner to the music? Because if it's about the connection, well, I feel quite confident that I'm able to do that, and that my efforts in learning the techniques, the skills, the body awareness, all of those details are contributing to that. All right. So feel free to share your own thoughts in terms of terms, right? Words and terms that have come up in your life that perhaps you have not defined, and they have affected your relationships with other people, or your personal growth, or your productivity, or your ability to teach and to learn. Because defining terms is important. It prevents confusion, misunderstandings, uncertainty, hopefully presents assumptions and wasted resources. And it helps promote, ultimately, this is the purpose of defining terms, it helps promote better communication, growth, openness, confidence, and deeper connections with ourselves inside, as well as with other people outside. So dance, teaching, and learning. When there's a lack of understanding of dance terms and techniques, what happens? Students struggle to understand what they're supposed to do. And then students get frustrated and confused, and students drop out. I've had multiple conversations with other dancers where they just feel like they don't understand. And whose responsibility would that be? That frustration and confusion impacts their growth and their motivation, which then affects their confidence. Right? They're like, just the simplicity of defining terms in a way that could be understood can have such a ripple effect, such a negative ripple effect, and also a positive ripple effect. But it can really have a negative ripple effect on students. It's not just about saying, oh, they're confused, oh, they don't get it, oh, they're going to get it eventually, because you don't understand what's going through their mind about themselves for not being able to get something. And then how are they going to process that? And what are the next steps they're going to do? Are they going to be as resilient as you to continue pushing forward, or are they going to give up? The other element of defining terms, especially within dance, is safety, right? I just got those comments here on Instagram talking about let me see, where is that? Of course, I really wished Instagram, well, whatever. I guess Instagram Live is more about speaking to the camera and just talking to people as they comment. So this doesn't help. I lost it. Anyway, something about weak lead or a rough lead. There are so many things that are not defined enough to avoid getting to that thing. So for example, a rough lead. People will say in classes, don't be a rough lead. Don't know what that means. How are you teaching the technique? What are the points of connection that could lead to something going from smooth to being rough and uncomfortable? Little things like I'll go to a hammerlock turn. Okay. And this is for all my listeners here, replay or live, who are not in dance. There's a move called a hammerlock where the leader ends up putting the follower into, or is it an S turn? Hammerlock, where the leader basically puts a follower's hand behind her back out of a turn. Most of the time, this is taught as, on a time, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, lift your hand, turn her on 5, lower the hand on this time, etc. But the details of don't be rough with it isn't defined. Well, what's the roughness? Where does the roughness come from? Gripping. All right, we don't think about that and we don't talk about it. We just talk about don't be rough with the lead, don't force. What is forcing? Well, forcing is when you're holding somebody's hand in a position that it can no longer turn and you're going to do it anyways. And so what needs to be corrected or what needs to be defined? Well, how do you make that smooth? How do you go from rough to smooth? A smoother connection, or perhaps not all your fingers, or perhaps not gripping with the thumb, or perhaps allowing the wrist to rotate. Right there, or perhaps the exact timing of when certain things need to be lowered. Those are elements of defining what smooth means. But most of the time we just use this term generically and assume that people understand the difference between rough and smooth and understand how to create it. And in terms of teaching, like when you don't define the terms, how do you assess progress? Right? How, if as a teacher you haven't explained something in detail, how do you assess whether your student is executing it properly or not? The vaguer you are, the harder it becomes to measure progress. The vaguer you are with your guidelines, the harder it becomes to measure progress. And as a result, again, back to increased frustration, decreased motivation, and most likely not achieving those outcomes that you want, and worst case scenario, giving up. Just gonna reply to a comment here. Janina said, I find a good salsa bachata dancer a good combination of basic steps, technique with your own creativity to the music you're hearing. Processing movements, timing with a lot of smiles during the dancing makes for a great dancer. If I find some movements rough, I will communicate it with my leader. Great comment. Again, out of everything you said, the word that would need to be defined there is rough. Right? We don't take enough time to explain what we mean by terms that are loaded. Right? So I'll ask again, what are some other dance terms that you hear often but don't understand right away? Or as teachers, are there terms that you're using that you assume students understand because they happen to be in your class? And then also, what is your purpose as a teacher? Right? Like, what kind of students do you want to develop? Because it's not just enough to show up and regurgitate all of the knowledge and experience and information that you have in your head in the way that you've learned it or in the way that you've understood it. The purpose is really ultimately getting other people to understand, to teach, to help grow, to help build, to help develop other people. I mean, I'm definitely curious about the terms because, as I mentioned, the most common ones is like soft, rough, smooth, proper, grounded, feminine, as I mentioned before. So, another situation or another circumstance or that we were talking about where it's really important for defining terms is in our relationships, whether those are family relationships, whether they are romantic relationships, or whether they are friendships, or even co-workers, right? Professional relationships. When you define terms, I see today's live chat is on defining terms for better communication. But when you define terms, what you do ultimately is you set boundaries. Right? If I define a term, if I'm defining a box as this box here, I'm setting a boundary. And this allows for the other person to understand what is and isn't acceptable in that relationship. Going back to what I had said before, commitment, right? Consistency, support, presence. Those are things that weren't often defined. And as a result, there were many moments of unintentional disrespect. Not that the person intends to disrespect you or me, but it happens because I don't know when I'm outside of this box if nobody bothered to draw the box for me, right? So, with relationships, defining terms allows you to avoid those misunderstandings or at least help move away from them or to minimize how many misunderstandings there are or hurting someone else's feelings or even conflict. And even when there's conflict, when you define terms, it's easier to resolve those conflicts because much of the conflict is in the misunderstanding. Much of the hurt feelings is in not being able to understand someone else's intention and seeing or hearing what they said or do and feeling like that was a deliberate attack when in reality it was just a lack of understanding. And then ultimately, obviously, defining terms helps you build trust because where do we feel safe? We feel safe in environments that we understand. If I was out on the street, taking a walk on the street, and just random people started throwing rocks, and the other street, people were throwing flowers, like, I don't understand what to expect when I go out and walk on a street. But because of the rules, right? This is a weird analogy perhaps, but because of the rules, I understand that I can expect not to be thrown and hit with anything. And that trust in that definition based on the laws that are out on in our world allow me to trust going outside. Same thing happens in relationships when we can actually define words and come to a shared understanding of those definitions and agree to them with somebody else, it becomes much easier for us to trust that relationship because I know that you know what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, what I accept, and you know that the same holds for you. and that we understand this word to mean X. And so we know not to go to Y and not to go to any other alphabet if we want to maintain our relationship. And so, as long as we have that understanding, I trust that this relationship has a foundation for growth. Question for all of you with regards to relationships, right? We talked about dance terms. So, what are some dance terms that you feel are used that could be clarified, that should be clarified? So, in relationships, you can talk about friendship, you could talk about family, you could talk about romance, you could talk professional. What are some common, undefined, poorly defined, or where there are many assumed definitions? What are some common words that have caused conflict in your personal relationships? Like I mentioned, support was one of them for me. Commitment was another one. Consistency was another. A couple of comments here. Wade said, the word fundamentals confuse me when everyone uses this term, but rarely agrees with each other on what are the real fundamentals or if there are any. Yeah, brilliant. Marcus, I've begun to ask what exactly the other person needs from me in terms of the relationship, such as, do you need me to listen or do you need advice? Beautiful to ask questions. Hi, Chris. 62 stories high. Carla Jimenez says, dance connection. Indeed, right? That is a really good example because I've heard that too. Like, it's all about the dance connection. Well, what is the dance connection? And me speaking about these things, I always say, whether you're watching live or watching this replay, I always say I am a work in progress. I'm not perfect. All I am doing with my live chats and all of these moments to engage with all of you is to share the incremental steps that I'm taking to developing myself, to increasing my self-awareness, to improving my communication. And that's the best that I can do. That's what actually gives me some sense of purpose in life, because I'm learning all of these things too. But me learning those lessons and keeping them within me doesn't serve anybody. Sure, it serves me and perhaps the people that I interact with directly, but if we have lessons that we've learned that could truly benefit everybody, why not share them? Especially if there's a platform to share them. And that's my purpose. So I know I've been guilty in my past of saying, oh, connect. What does connect mean? Right. So for all of our dance instructors and dancers who are speaking to each other about dance, what does connection mean to you? Take a minute to define it for the other person. But I mean, more importantly, take a minute to define it for yourself, because there are a lot of words that we use because they are common jargon, because they're what we hear on a regular basis, that we did not even bother to question, that we did not bother to wonder what the definition might be. And because we use it in the context of what in dance, for example, connection, we use that often when it comes to dance conversations, but we don't take the time to actually understand it for ourselves. And so when we're telling somebody to connect, what are we expecting from that person? And do we understand that that term connection means different things to different people? A couple of the comments here. Connection for us is I dance best when I feel that person enjoys it. Serious faces block me from uh, expressing yourself. Yeah. Elijah, knowing terms just like knowing words helps us give voice to our current state and starting point. Beautifully put. Robert, I was just recently to catch me if you can. Start the recording. I'm not sure I understand what you're saying, Robert. Maybe you want to reword that or rephrase that for me. Tracy from Virginia. Can't remember where you're at now. DC? All right. And then finally, terms are important for personal growth, right? That self-awareness, the clarity. When we understand the words that we're using to define ourselves, When we have a definition for those words that we use to define ourselves, it makes it much easier for us to continue on our path to achieve those goals because we have something to measure it against. Just like a teacher student relationship, where if a teacher does not clearly outline, this is what's required for you to progress, this specific understanding, or this detailed understanding, or this level of engagement and expression, then it's easy to measure whether someone is actually meeting those. But those kind of terms and definitions are super important for us individually for our own personal growth, which again, I mentioned before, I had a difficult time with that. I had a difficult time outlining who am I? And it's not about labeling ourselves and limiting ourselves to labels, but it's about choosing your labels. And you can change those labels, but you got to be able to define those labels. And what means something to you? What are you pursuing? And what does the pursuit of that thing actually look like? What are the things that you could check off and say, yes, I am. Yes, I am aligning with my own values, my beliefs, and my priorities. What are your values and your beliefs and your priorities? There's so many things that we pursue in life. There's so many connections that we pursue in life, and we forget to define a lot of these really important, crucial terms and details. And that results in having failed relationships, having unfulfilling jobs, not feeling happy with where you are, feeling stuck, not feeling creative, not feeling motivated. All of those things, they don't get removed completely. They're not eliminated completely, but they are definitely mitigated if we can find a little bit more clarity and if we can take the time to define. Like, I really cannot help but emphasize defining something in as much detail as possible without being too fixed, right? Um, for all of you, I mean, have you ever written down exactly why you do what you do, why you pursue the things you pursue, why you chose a specific job, not just hopefully for the money or what you can learn, but what does it serve for you, your purpose in your life? How does it align with your values and priorities? Or do you go wherever the wind blows? And how do you define progress or accomplishment? Right? There's those smart goals, right? Something that you can actually be specific about and measure. How do you define your own progress and your own accomplishments in your life? It could be a good parent, it could be a good girlfriend or a good boyfriend or a good friend. I mean, have you taken the time to define what those things mean to you and define them to the other person as well, to see if you can you're actually doing what you set yourself out to do? Paulinita, hello. So, what are some common mistakes and assumptions? Uh, I got a lot of these in the Facebook comments as well, but there are 7 that I'm going to mention right now, at least. These are common assumptions, common mistakes that we make uh, that have, especially as a result of connection or defining words, rather, as a result of defining or poorly defining or not clarifying the definition of words, that have resulted in misunderstanding and miscommunication. Before I get into let me just answer or read out some of these comments. Giannina said, for me, I find it difficult when my tried a great challenge to keep being clear and communicating in my work as a social worker. I've used a lot of short sentences in communicating to connect with colleagues, people, friends, etc. I like to stay away from assumptions and judgmental and show interest in my work and outside. Friendly nonverbal communication. With your words, people will sense the realness, commitment in whatever you're doing. That is a great point. We're going to get into that actually. Tips. Oh, computer's loud. In the tips that we can actually implement to improve our communication and find clarity. Marcus said, I've kept a journal since I was 15, and I'm always writing my goals and how I feel about them. That's beautiful. I have kept a journal for a couple of years. So I'm curious what it would have been like if I had kept a journal since I was 15, what I would have come across and how I would have changed. So back to the question. What are some common mistakes? My goodness, I knew that. What are some common mistakes or assumptions that we made based on poorly defined, undefined, or unclear or disagreed upon definitions of words that resulted in misunderstanding and miscommunication? One, I would say, is the same understanding because we're in the same room. This is super common for classroom settings, dance classes, organizations, companies, teams. There's an there's a mistaken understanding that because we're in the same room, we must understand the same terms. There's same values and a code because we're interested in each other. And this is very common in friendships and relationships, especially romantic relationships, where you think that because there's a physical attraction and there's a level of openness and communication and you feel a chemistry, that you have the same values and codes and beliefs and priorities, and that you pursue the same things in life. But to have a successful friendship, something that's actually mutually beneficial, that brings value to both of your lives, those things need to be communicated and defined. Because eventually, if they're not, and you're actually not with the same values and belief systems, then there will be a breakdown, there will be conflict, there will be a misunderstanding in dance. But also, uh, even in my Toastmasters meetings and workshops that I've presented, there's language barriers. Right? There's a lot of times that we forget that there are language barriers. And it's not even to talk about traveling to another country where their dominant language or their main language is not English. Even within an English speaking country like the United States, there are different understandings of the language. Just like in dance, there are different understandings of the dance. You have beginner dancers, intermediate dancers, advanced dancers. Right? We're all learning the same language. We're all speaking the same language, but we understand it to a different depth. And same thing goes for communication. Right? There are barriers, and we have to remember that there are potential barriers. We always want to approach, until we clarify, we always want to approach the situation with the possibility that there might be a barrier. The other mistake or assumption we make is when we project our abilities on others as instructors, as teachers, where we think that because we've had students for X amount of time, that naturally they should be at the level that we expect them to be. Because, well, I was there after 5 months, I was there after 1 year. Why are you not? So I expect you to be as comfortable communicating as I do, as comfortable expressing yourself as I do. And when we project our own abilities on other people, that tends to lead to disappointment. And that often results in not clarifying things because we assume, well, if I understand this, so must you, because we have had the same experience. And so we must have the same abilities by this point. There is a situation with the same vocabulary, but different source. And this is very common in any communal environment, especially, but also in relationships, in personal relationships. You could be using the same term, basic step, fundamentals, grounded. But what were your sources? What have been the sources that have defined that term for you in the past? And how does that affect your understanding and your definition today? Do we enter into every situation and say, okay, well, teacher's talking basic, so I'm just going to do the basic as I understand it? Or do we try and clarify, what does the basic mean to this instructor? And as an instructor, do you understand that people come from different places, different experiences? Same thing with relationships, right? Are what you understood to be commitment in one relationship that was either successful or unsuccessful might not be the same definition that can be brought into a current relationship, right? So same vocabulary, same words, same relative context, which is another issue. Sometimes we lack context. We haven't put the words and the terms into context. But missing that context, like we forget that people might use the same words, but those words have already been defined by multiple other people. And we need to be mindful of that. Right. So, and then in terms of context, the same words have different meanings in different situations. I would not speak to a student and say, you know, hey, jerk, that's not how you do the move, right? But I have one of my friends, and we both have each other's contacts saved in our phone with the middle name jerk because we're always calling each other a jerk, but it's affectionate. It's a term of endearment between us, but it would definitely be an insult to other people. And that inability to establish context for whatever it is that you're saying, whatever words you're using, can sometimes lead to that misunderstanding and miscommunication. And then finally, there's, at least for today, I'm sure there are others. I would love to hear whatever experiences you've had in terms of mistakes or assumptions that you've made when it comes to defining words. But the other one is rigidity, right? Sometimes when you're too rigid with your box, like it's one thing to draw a line in the sand and say, okay, this is the game that we're playing. Come play a game with me. I'm going to draw a box in the sand. And the goal of this successful game, executing this game, is going to be to stay within this box. And we agree to that and we try. And occasionally, sometimes maybe we step out of the box and we explain why that happened, or we say, okay, fine, let's extend the box. There's another approach to that where you build a 500-foot concrete wall, and that's your box. And now you feel constrained being in there. That definition is so rigid that of course there's going to be misunderstandings and miscommunications and resentment possibility, because you haven't you didn't establish that definition with somebody else. You created that definition and forced someone into it, right? So these are some common mistakes and assumptions that we make when it comes to defining terms and or not defining terms, and the impact it ends up having on our relationships and our communication. So let me just answer stuff. Oh, a phrase Henry said, I've heard that grates me is, yes, but you have to understand. Touche. Tracy said, I've always written everything down. Writing things down is a great approach, at least for self-awareness. So whose responsibility is? Let's go into, we understand the importance. Right? We understand how, what kind of problems can occur when we don't define terms, as it pertains to learning and teaching, as it pertains to relationships of all kinds, and as it pertains to our personal growth. And here are some common mistakes and assumptions that people make that contribute to that misunderstanding and that confusion and possible conflict and resentment. So whose responsibility is it? And this was interesting because I did get a comment. Where is that comment? Earlier that I had mentioned at the beginning of this live chat, which was about, where is this Facebook comment? I should have kept that saved outside. Which was, it's not you, it's them. Some people will take things the wrong and complete opposite way, no matter how well it's masterfully spelled out for them. And though I appreciate this approach of masterfully presenting something, masterful in your presentation does not mean it's masterfully understood, right? And this takes us back to our purpose. What is our purpose of communicating? We're often quick to point a finger and say, you misunderstood, which, sure, that might have existed, that actually occurred. But we rarely take the time to say, I communicated poorly. And so there's an agency and there's a certain sense of accountability when it comes to who is responsible. Because the truth is, we're all responsible. Anyone who's engaged in that moment, teacher, student, colleague, with other colleagues, employee, manager, two friends, relationships, family members, and obviously within ourselves, right? We are all responsible. It's not one person's responsibility entirely. And if there is a misunderstanding, if you cannot take a step back and say, could that have been my fault? Then you're not contributing to the solution. So, how can we identify when a term is not clearly defined? How and when do we take responsibility to clarify and define those terms when we're speaking to somebody? And another part of it is, how do we encourage others to speak up and seek that clarification when there's a misunderstanding? Because again, it's everyone's responsibility. And yes, it's unavoidable, because those assumptions and mistakes that I'd mentioned before, they happen so naturally that we really don't take them, we take it for granted, how much we think other people understand us based on whatever we're saying. And so it's likely that we will not communicate, that we will not define those things. But there are some tips for being able to clarify words and terms, especially loaded terms, especially terms that are instrumental in building a foundation, like in dance. What are the fundamentals? Doing something properly, and that are instrumental in healthy relationships. What does commitment? What does being present mean? Right? All of these things, these are loaded terms, but because we hear them and use them so frequently, we diminish their meaning when we say them, but in reality, they mean a lot. And we need to be able to define those things. So when it comes to how we can approach that, first, I would say, is go in with good intentions and one assumption, at least to start, which is that the other person that you're speaking to is also well intentioned. Second is to create a safe space for questions. And that is in your tone, in your wording, in your presentation, in the environment that you create. Dance schools, for example, there are a lot of teachers who don't like to be questioned, especially in front of others. It's one thing to have a private lesson and ask the teacher something. It's another thing entirely, and how they respond will vary when you ask them in front of a large audience, a workshop, or a dance class. There are some teachers who don't like to be questioned, and so that is not a safe environment. Right? Same thing with a personal relationship. If the person you are speaking to is or the person who's speaking to you that you need to clarify something with is quick to outbursts, that is not a safe environment. That doesn't encourage me to trust that I am allowed to speak freely. So that takes me to the next point, which is about emotions, right? There's nothing wrong with experiencing emotions, but there is an element of controlling how they are expressed, and to know when and where they should be inserted and how they should be inserted. So the more emotional you are, the less likely you're taking the time to have rational thought and to put some thought into your words and how you're actually expressing yourself. Those emotions might come out and they might cloud the words that you're using. They might muddle the definition that you are trying to create. There's also the never assume anything that is important to you is understood or important to someone else. And I can't stress this part enough. There are some things that are really important to some people, like timeliness, right? Timeliness for me is huge. I like people to be on time because I am on time. It's partial projection, yes, but it's also a request that I often make. Now, timeliness, when I say I'm going to be somewhere at a certain time, and I express that to somebody, that depends on their idea of punctuality, right? How do they define punctual? Punctual for me is early. Punctual for some people is right on the dot. Punctual for others is give or take 30 minutes. So, how is that term defined? And if it is, in most cases, that's again loaded, punctual, right? That's a loaded term. It's important to me. And if it's really important to me, I want to make sure that I define that clearly. So if I speak to somebody else, I'm like, listen, this is what time we're meeting. Please do not be late. Like, I will be there 15 minutes earlier. Please don't be late. I really hate this. I don't like waiting for people, and I have other things that I could do. So please don't be like, I specify, I clarify what that means to me to be somewhere at a certain time so that we can have a shared understanding of punctuality, right? um, the other element is, another tip is to take agency over your own growth, right? No one will or should care more about you and your own growth than you do. Chances are no one will. Everyone will fall in line with whatever lowest standard and lowest bar that you set for yourself. There's many people who might want the best for you, but they will not push more than you push for yourself. So if you're in a situation where you don't understand something, don't walk out, especially if it's an important relationship or an important commitment like learning or teaching. Don't walk out. Don't give up right away. Start by asking some questions, right? And that's an element. Part of improving that communication and minimizing the misunderstandings that can take place is that active listening, right? And asking clarifying questions. So, not just, what do you mean? Because I get that from students too, just like I got that comment from Henry earlier. But you have to understand, this is something that often comes from the teacher side, right? What do you mean? From the student side, don't what do you mean is so general. So the more specific you can get with your question, the more specific I can get with my answer and actually address the issue that you're having. What do you mean by fundamentals? If I did not explain it, sure. What do you mean by fundamentals in terms of the connection with the ground specifically? Oh, okay, cool. Let me explain that in detail. And then another tip is, if you're on the receiving end of words, terms that are important to you, or you can see are important to somebody else, or you can understand the impact of those words as they pertain to your relationship, repetition. Take the time to repeat what you heard in your own words and your own understanding, because there are a lot of people who say, so you said that, that. Yeah, that's great. That is exactly what I said. Thank you very much. That didn't really help much, right? You want to actually be able to repeat that in your own words. You said this, and this is what I understand it to be. Am I correct? Is that what you meant? So, just a couple of tips. And then finally, there are certain characteristics that we need to bring to the table in addition to asking questions, clarifying, repeating, listening actively. We need to be willing to have empathy. It's hard to understand someone or be willing to listen to them if we don't have empathy for the other person, in terms of they have different experiences. They come from a different background, and naturally their understanding is going to be different. If we can't empathize with that, then we should not be expecting to be understood either. Having patience, or being able to define your purpose. What is your purpose? If it's to connect with someone, or if it's to communicate with somebody, if it's to understand that person, then patience is absolutely necessary, because not everything is going to happen immediately as soon as you put it out there. Just because you made a request doesn't mean you're going to get exactly what you want. So you might have to be patient, especially if there is something that you want from that person. If you are interested in a healthy friendship with someone and there has been a misunderstanding, you have to empathize with that person, be able to communicate what it is that you want, and then be patient with the possible results. And as from there, there's compromise, right? That we all have to be willing to do, because It's not my way or your way, it's our way. It's about creating a shared language and a shared experience that benefits us both. So once you have your definitions, once you've understood them, once you've explained them to each other, then there's an element of compromise. Well, this is your definition. This is your box. I would really like to go to this side. I don't want to just be stuck here. And so can you extend your box a little bit further? Does that make sense to you? And then there's an element of forgiveness, because what if that person, based on poorly defined terms, has stepped out of that box? What if you drew that box in the sand, right? Or you sprinkled sugar on the table as an outline of your box, and a fan just blew everything away? And now that person did something that they don't know whether it's in the box or not. Right? Forgiveness is a huge element for improving that communication, improving relationships based on misunderstandings that are a result of terms that are not perfectly defined or clearly defined, because a lot of those actions could be unintentional. And then finally, we need to be able to set boundaries, because there's an element of defining terms. There's an element of defining what it is that you want, what it is that you're willing to accept, and perhaps even coming to a compromise with somebody else. But sometimes, no matter how much you try, no matter how many respectful attempts you have to communicate and to clarify further, the results are still not what you're looking for. And if you define certain terms, and this goes back to your purpose and your definition of your own purpose and your values and what you believe you deserve, you have to be able to walk away from those situations, because standing around, sticking it out when it's clearly against your definitions is not necessarily being brave or strong. It is another example of a poor definition, right? If I define this, I will not accept this, or I will not accept this, I will accept this only under these circumstances, and somebody is trampling over that box. They're just kicking that line and breaking down the wall that you created and all of that stuff, and you're still there, then you not accepting it is not accurate. And so going forward, how do you expect someone to continue to treat you? Now there's uncertainty on what exactly is your definition, because you said you wouldn't, but you're still here and you're still doing it. You're still accepting this behavior that you absolutely said is unacceptable. So what is your definition? Your definition is one thing in words and a completely different thing in your actions, right? Wait, so what happened if my nationality dictates how I operate with being on time, asking for are you talking about like Latino time here? Well, just to address that question really quickly, uh, the power of definitions, right? One is that it creates a shared language. It allows teachers and students, teachers to be more effective, right? Because you waste less time on going back and forth with your students, just explaining the same thing over and over in the same words, which they didn't understand. It's easier to build and help them grow. It lays foundation for creativity. For students, you learn and progress faster. You feel comfortable, you feel confident, you are willing to express yourself. For relationships, it improves your communication. You avoid those misunderstandings. You avoid unnecessary conflict and resentment and feeling hurt, and build like stronger and positive connections. And then for yourself, right, there's this improved self-awareness and hopefully self-esteem and confidence that comes from knowing what you want and being able to stick to it and making decisions that align with your values and your beliefs, and making progress to whatever goals you have. But ultimately, definitions, there we have agency in those definitions too. Right? You get to choose how you want to define yourself. And remember, going back to context, it really depends on the context. You can have a word that is defined differently in different contexts, and that's completely okay. So Wade is talking about DNA, Latino time being late. Okay. Um, I have a lot of friends who are my one of my good friends who's Mexican is always late. Um, so I understand that, but define it differently when you're meeting someone who is not within your culture. Right? If within your culture it is just silly to arrive even 1 hour after the time that was specified, 6 p.m. If you show up at 7 p.m., you're dumb. You should have showed up at 9. Everyone's going to be showing up at 9. Sure, within that community, within that setting. But again, if the relationship is important enough to you, or the person or the pursuit is important enough to you, you will clarify what that means before you make your own decisions. You could talk about, you know, generally speaking, okay, Latino time is arriving late. Well, would you take that same approach if it was a job interview? Because I guarantee you, you probably are not going to get that job. Would you take the same approach with a doctor's appointment? Do you think the doctor who has multiple patients lined up for them is going to wait for you? Probably not. So already you have defined that term as on time differently for different people, different contexts. You have already done that. And so the fact that you have done that in other situations without even consciously attempting it, you can define things differently. So ultimately, it depends on the pursuit. It depends on what you want out of that connection, out of that relationship, out of that pursuit of a goal or activity or whatever it is. It depends on that you make your definitions. But you do need to take the time to clarify them, especially loaded terms. Okay, because it's not enough just to speak. We have to speak clearly with the intent to be understood. And it's not enough just to listen. We have to listen actively with the intent to understand fully. That's the only way to truly communicate, to develop better connections, to develop meaningful connections, and to grow and get shit done. Because until we're clear, our decisions are vague and they don't align with anything. Greater the clarity, the easier it is to align what you do, what you say, who you connect with, what you pursue with the things that are actually going to help you get there. Final thoughts. If you have any words, I would love to hear some of the words that you've encountered, whether it's in dance, teaching, learning, or relationships, family, friendships, romantic, or in company settings with other colleagues, with managers, with employees, or even personal growth, right? What terms that you haven't defined, and how has it impacted your growth? How has it impacted your results? How has it impacted your connection with another human being? Because those words are important and you always have the power to define them if you want to take the time to do so. But first, you need to be able to define your own purpose and what you want, and what are the things that would be checked off to show you that you are getting what you want in life. All right. Um, Final little comments. If you've been here for the entire live chat, or if you are watching this replay, please take a moment to complete the feedback form, magnagopal.com/feedback. There's 2 more questions that I wanted to answer. I know we're going a little bit over time today. 2 questions that I wanted to answer that were posed on Instagram and on Facebook. But feedback form for the live chat, magnagopal.com/feedback. If you want to show extra support for the live chats and support the channel and all of the things that I'm doing, you can go down into the description on Instagram. I think there's badges, but on Facebook and on YouTube, you should be able to scroll down to the description. There's a link to buy a coffee. You can give me a coffee if you like. And if you have any questions, or if you're interested in coaching or dance lessons or anything like that, please visit my website, magnagopal.com. And super easy, no cost support is hit like, hit subscribe on the channel, and share it with your friends. On YouTube, you can cut links. You can clip videos rather. So you can, if there's a certain section that you want to share, you can timestamp that and share that link specifically, or you can even clip like up to a minute, if I'm not mistaken, and share that clip with other people. But I would really appreciate that It helps me do more. It helps me see that I am doing something right. And the feedback form in particular helps me understand where you're coming from, if I've helped in any way with this particular topic, and how I can be of more help in the future with our future live chats, as well as, again, don't forget that audio podcast is coming out very, very soon. That will actually allow me to address quicker questions in shorter bites versus this live chat, because this takes a lot of effort to set this up, but it would be a lot easier for me to record answers in a microphone alone. So my last two questions. One was in response to the video that I had posted about how do you let rejection define your experiences. And one of the comments that I received was, you can say no to anyone who asks you for a dance anytime, anywhere. Several good or legitimate reasons why one should or shouldn't. Those reasons are pretty easy to recognize and communicate. The reasons why don't say no, say yes to everyone has been suggested is because it's creating an abundant dance community. And it defeats people's fears, insecurities, and prejudices and egocentric thoughts and attitudes that cause and create both individual and group failures. The dance community, being able to say no, has never required training except in a very few cases. You can and should say yes to a dance. That is, unless you are in need of going home riddled with the same anxieties, fears, self-pity, and self-centeredness that in part probably motivated or forced you to decide to take up this. I couldn't understand that last part. But basically, to summarize what this person has said is, excuse me, to summarize what they're saying is that you should say yes to everyone who asks you to dance, unless you have really good reasons. Back to definitions. What is a good reason? A good reason is whatever bloody reason I pick, because it's my reason, and I have a right to my own reasons for why I say no to something. I used to feel that way about dance. Oh, I really got to stop talking now, right? It's now my throat is dry. I used to feel this way about dance in the beginning when I started, which was I should say yes to everyone. And then I realized that my nights out weren't always as much fun or as safe. Sure, safety is a good concern to have when it comes to saying yes or saying no to a dance. But sometimes it's a preference. Sometimes I don't want to dance with someone. Sometimes I want to dance with someone else. Or sometimes I don't want to dance for no reason whatsoever other than I just want to stand around right now. That I am entitled to that. This is my body, my time, my energy, my effort. And no one has the right to force me to do anything with any of those things. I choose and I decide. And everyone chooses and they decide. I have found most of the people who insist on saying yes to every dance are either leaders, because you have greater control over the dance. Followers, on the other hand, tend to, if the lead's going to be going through crazy turn patterns and spins and all of that stuff, a follower, for the most part, is going to be going through that, unless you just let go of the leader's hands and just do your own thing and shine for the entire dance. So leaders, you have an easier approach to saying yes, because if you don't feel like dancing crazy because you're tired, you can have a very, very calm dance doing just some basic steps and basic turns. The other people I find who say you should say yes all the time are people who have been rejected a lot. Okay. And I am sorry that you've been rejected a lot, but you're not alone. I have also. Okay. I know I got that on my TED talk about rejection and the benefits of rejection, and how many people had commented and said, oh, she's never been rejected. She's lying. What could she possibly know about rejection? And yeah, a pretty face or a pretty smile, I'm sorry, does not get you everywhere. And when it comes to dance technique, no one gives, like, to a degree, maybe they care about, like, how does the partner look? But when you realize that the person you're dancing with, when I sucked, okay, and I was an absolute beginner, when they realized that I wasn't any good, there's no amount of smiles that was making that better, that a better experience for them. Me stepping on their foot or bumping into other people or like just not following and hurting them, there's no smile or pretty face that makes that worth it. So everyone goes through it. The purpose of defining, not letting rejection define your experience, is keep on asking, because ultimately you will get better. And if you can have a good attitude about it instead of an expectation and an entitlement to other people that they need to say yes just because, well, community or connection or whatever, then you're projecting, and it's not fair to other people. Because if you were in their shoe or constantly being asked, you would want the right to say no to what you do with your body as well. And so for those people dealing with rejection or being told like you never say no, I wholeheartedly disagree. Okay. I used to have a different approach to that until I got injured and until I realized how many people really are just out there for themselves. And I realized that in this dance, in this life, that as long as I'm not hurting anybody else, I should be allowed to pursue the things that bring me happiness. And maybe a rejection hurts you, but that's not my intention, saying no to you. You being injured by my rejection is on you, actually. So when you get rejected, and we all do, and I still do, like I need to sometimes clarify that a little bit more. I still do get rejected, okay, from various things and on the dance floor many times. I have learned, I have built this into my system to just brush it off and move on, because it's never the person. Okay, it's not about the person that is going to deliver it's not the person, that one single person who can deliver that experience. There are many people that can deliver that experience, and most likely if the person doesn't want to deliver that experience to me, they're not the right person to deliver that experience. That should be clear, but sometimes it is not. And as soon as we personalize things and as soon as we make it about that individual, we forget what our purpose is. And please, this goes back to our topic today: definitions. What is your purpose? Why are you there? I mentioned in the other video, when you're on the dance floor, what are you there for? To dance with one person or to dance? So if you don't dance with that one person, can you still dance? Of course you can. Go find the dance. When you are dating in the dating community, when somebody rejects you, someone that you really liked, what were you there for? To date that one person who you didn't even know about before yesterday's swipe left or swipe right on your application that you've never even seen before? No, you're there for a healthy, beautiful, loving, caring relationship. So if this person, you go on a date and then you really like this person and this person doesn't like you back, well, they're not going to give you that loving, healthy, caring relationship. So move on, right? Look at those moments where you're being rejected as not dodging a bullet, because that sounds terrible, but look at those moments where you receive a rejection as grace, as good fortune. Because if someone can't give you what you're looking for, why would you want to try and force it out of them? Why not look for someone who can deliver that to you? That's my comment on that part. Second comment, or second question, was from Alexandra on Instagram. This was something that was bothering her and other fellow dancers. When your lead dances off the beat, would you rather be in sync with him or dance to the music anyway and create a huge disconnect? I have a live chat on bad leads. And actually, speaking of like rejection, I have another live chat dedicated just to dealing with rejection, and the TED Talk, if you guys want to go check that out. But I have a live chat on bad leads, but I'll address this question really quickly. Definitions, right? Wow. Like these questions just came. I was going to answer these questions independently of today's live chat's topic, but they all fall into line. What is your purpose when you get on the dance floor? What is the purpose when you connect with somebody else on the dance floor? When you say yes to a dance, what is your purpose? For me, that purpose is connecting with another person in terms of having a good vibe, a good energy, following them, and adapting my own ability to follow to whatever their ability is, and having a fun 5-minute dance. And if I don't want to repeat that again, if it was really that uncomfortable, I don't have to repeat it again. But off the time is not a big deal. They're not breaking my arm. They're just not sticking to the music. And it's a challenge for you as a follower. If you're dancing with a lead who dances off beat, it's 5 minutes. Do you think you have the skill to dance off beat? Because it's a skill. So do you think you have the skill to dance off beat with this partner? Can you adapt your own level of technical knowledge and change your idea of the basic so that you're not necessarily dancing 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, but you're dancing 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 8, 1, 2, 5, 6, right? Can you do that? Because I mean, this person can, and they seem to be able to maintain something or just step. So we can do it, but it requires a certain perspective and a certain approach to it. But if your focus is when I dance, I must dance on time and I have to stick to my basic, well, then this dance will be really uncomfortable for you. And perhaps you call out of the dance or you say no before it even starts. But if your purpose when it comes to dancing is to connect with another person in whatever ways possible to connect with that person, then you will find ways to adapt. I've had some amazing dances with people who dance off beat because they were still doing some really cool moves and their connection with me and their upper body was pretty solid. So I was able to understand what they were doing. Yes, I had to ignore the timing. Yes, I had to ignore the music and the count, but I did not have to sacrifice a connected dance just because we weren't dancing to the time, the basic timing as I defined it. So those are my last two answers to some of the questions that I got. Hope you enjoyed today's live chat. Again, please take a minute, magnagopal.com/feedback. Leave your feedback on today's live chat. Please be detailed in your feedback because if there are vague terms, they don't help. They don't help me. They don't help you because you didn't take the time either to understand what is amazing exactly, right? Oh, yeah, it was amazing. What does amazing mean? I don't know. It was amazing. Doesn't help, right? Doesn't help anybody. And in everything that you do going forward, think about how you're connecting with other people and what are the terms that you are using as a teacher, as a student, as an employer, as an employee, as a friend, as a girlfriend, boyfriend, family member, and the terms that you're using to yourself. You know, how clearly can you define them and how well are your actions, your behaviors, your interactions with other people, and the things that you accept and allow into your life, how do they align with those definitions that you've created? Do they need to be redefined? Do you need to compromise? Are they too rigid? Are they too vague? Right? Take a minute to reflect because I promise you it will improve your clarity in life, improve your communication, improve your relationships, and accelerate your personal growth. It's been helping me. That's why I'm sharing today's topic with all of you, and I am certain that it will help you too. And on that note, I bid you all adieu. I appreciate you all sticking around. If you were watching the replay, you probably got the perk of timestamps and being able to forward through certain portions of this live chat. But the replay will be available on YouTube. I know we went even longer today, but whatever. It's an important topic, and I want to discuss this in as much detail as I could possibly provide. And I hope that it helped you in some way, at least to reflect going forward, because if we can at least stop, pause, think before we act or before we speak, we're already doing something a little bit better than just being reactive in this life. Thank you, Wade. Thank you, everybody who joined. And I will catch you next month's live chat. And please don't forget the audio podcast, which will be shorter clips. It won't be an hour and a half long. It will be short clips specifically addressing certain topics that you'll be able to listen to on the go without having to be on YouTube to watch the video itself. So keep an eye out for that, the Empowered with Magna podcast. And if you have any thoughts or questions or things you'd like me to address in future live chats, again, the feedback form, magnagopal.com/feedback is the place that you can do it. Thank you, everybody. Love you all. Thank you for all your support over the years. Again, you can click subscribe, like, share. That's an easy way to support. But I appreciate all of you sharing your thoughts and comments whenever I post a question, sharing your experiences with specific reels, because I usually try and keep them very short and topic centered. And just overall, all your support over the years, because I would not be here today where I am in my career with dance and speaking and coaching if it wasn't for all of your support. So thank you. And this is my way of giving something back to you for providing me with this amazing environment to learn and grow. And these are the lessons that I've gotten. So hopefully they are coming back to you and helping you out. Thank you, Iris. Thank you, Eduardo, Giannina, Oscar, Marcus. Thank you all for your engagement, and I look forward to seeing you all next month. Bye. Always the challenge, right? Getting out of here. Danny boy, thank you. Appreciate it.